Thank you for downloading Business Matters from the BBC World Service. 50 minutes of interviews and discussion on the day's big news stories and themes from Asia, America, and across the globe.
It's midnight GMT. Hello, I'm Roger Hearing, and this is Business Matters on the BBC World Service. We're connecting the time zones. Today we're live in Philadelphia and Hong Kong. Coming up on the programme.
I was between protesters and army shooting people, so it was terrible for me.
Venezuela, a day of confusion and violence, a coup attempt gone wrong, or a stage in a long, slow transfer of power. Also, Apple announces a big drop in iPhone sales, but investors see it as part of a change in line with the tech giant's move to services rather than hardware. And Yeti prints. Did Indian soldiers find evidence of one of the world's most elusive and fabled beasts? That's Business Matters here on the BBC, coming up after the latest BBC News.
BBC News, hello, I'm Gareth Barlow. The US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro was ready to fly into exile in Cuba earlier on Tuesday after the opposition leader Juan Guaido called for an uprising against him. Mr. Pompeo told CNN that Mr. Maduro had a plane on the tarmac ready to take off, but was dissuaded from leaving by Russia. Earlier, other US officials said senior Venezuelan leaders had been ready to oust President Maduro and switch their support to Juan Guaido. Here's Barbara Pletusher.
U.S. officials said they knew that 3 senior Venezuelan figures, including the defense minister, had been negotiating with the opposition over plans to oust Mr. Maduro and support Juan Guaido. It was not clear why they didn't come through, said the State Department's Venezuela envoy Elliot Abrams, nor why Mr. Guaido had decided to make his move on Tuesday. Mr. Maduro is backed by Russia, Cuba and China. Mike Pompeo said Cuban military support in particular was propping up the Venezuelan leader, and President Trump threatened in a tweet to impose a full embargo on the island if that continued.
There were violent battles between protesters and security forces in Venezuela throughout Tuesday after demonstrators responded to Mr. Guaido's call. Katie Watson has more.
Images coming out of Caracas showed tear gas and live bullets being fired, and at one point armed tanks driven at protesters on the streets. Juan Guaido, who in January invoked the constitution and declared himself interim president, said that the armed forces were on the side of the constitution, but President Nicolas Maduro hit back, calling for nerves of steel. He and his defense minister insist that the military remains loyal to the government. A war of words continued over Twitter, with US National Security Advisor John Bolton warning Maduro loyalists that their time was up. Venezuela's foreign minister responded saying, "Dream on, not today."
President Trump has agreed with 2 senior Democrats to spend $2 trillion on improving the country's infrastructure. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi described it as a big and bold plan. The Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, said they'd meet in 3 weeks' time for further discussions.
We talked about a number of things we would do. Obviously, the roads and the bridges and the highways, but also a big emphasis on broadband, that every American home, we believe, needs broadband. So this was a very, very good start.
The United States has called on Russia and the Syrian government to return to a de-escalation of violence in northwestern Syria after airstrikes and the shelling of rebel areas intensified. The US State Department warned the region could be further destabilised. The UN has expressed deep concern over reports that 3 medical facilities have been damaged in the provinces of Idlib and Hama. On Friday, Syrian activists reported that 10 people had been killed in airstrikes. You're listening to the latest world news from the BBC.
Hello and welcome to Business Matters. I'm Roger Hearing. Coming up on the programme today, the latest from Venezuela, where what appears to have been a move to involve the military in pushing President Maduro from power seems now to have run into considerable trouble. Also, Apple's falling iPhone sales, but is it just part of a company readjustment from a saturated market? And what did produce the huge footprints found by Indian soldiers in the Himalayas? Was it a Yeti on tiptoe?
The stride between these giant footprints is very small. It's almost as if this creature is tiptoeing through the mountains.
More on that later. And I'll be joined throughout the programme by two guests on opposite sides of the Pacific. Amy Goldsmith, the director of Clean Water Action New Jersey, who's joining us from Philadelphia. Amy, a very good evening to you.
Hi.
Good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure.
And across the other side of the world, Andy Xie, the independent Chinese economist. Now, Andy, I said, I think earlier, that you were in Hong Kong. You're not. You're in Shanghai, aren't you? Is that right?
Yes, I'm in Shanghai.
Good. Well, good to have you there, and a very good morning to you, and welcome to the programme. Now, let's start with what's been happening in Venezuela. It's been a day of tension and doubt there, and fierce confrontation on the streets of Caracas, with bullets and tear gas being fired by security forces. Well, the day began with an announcement from Juan Guaido, the opposition leader, regarded by much of the world as the legitimate interim president, saying he now had military support. He was accompanied by soldiers as he made his announcement at a military base in Caracas in the early hours of the morning.
The
1st of May starts now. The end of the usurpation started today. We count on the people of Venezuela. The armed forces are on the side of the people and the Constitution. They're loyal to them.
However, the head of the Venezuelan military, General Vladimir Padrino, said the army remained loyal to President Nicolas Maduro. The general warned of possible bloodshed and condemned the actions of Mr. Guaido and his supporters.
To position weapons of war in a busy public highway, the principal highway of the Venezuelan capital, to position a group of men in vehicles stolen from our National Guard with machine guns and assault rifles and guns. This is a cowardly act, a terrorist act, a coup attempt of very small magnitude, very insignificant. This is why we have responded immediately.
Well, some Maduro supporters have seen the hand of Washington in all this. American officials say a number of senior members of the government in Caracas had promised to be involved in changing the Venezuelan administration, but were not now following through with that. US National Security Advisor John Bolton said the US did not rule anything out if the Venezuelan military used force against civilians.
All options remain on the table. I'm simply not going to be more specific to that, but recall that right at the beginning, 3 months ago, we said that it would be a big mistake for Maduro and those supporting him to use force against innocent civilians. We feel very strongly about it. We felt that way then. We feel that way now.
So a confused situation in Caracas, which is now reported to be quite quiet on the streets. But just before we came on air, I spoke to Katiana Cardona. She's a photojournalist in the Venezuelan capital.
Today I was on the streets. I went to La Carlota, where the army is. This is a small airport inside Caracas, and there were many protests there. Guaido was there, Leopoldo Lopez was there, and they have fight. You know, the army with the protesters, the people of the resistance, they have a fight with rocks and bullets, unfair fight. So they threw out bombs and they shoot people. There were many people injured today. There were dead people too.
What was it like for you on the streets? Was it risky being there?
Yes, for everybody. For everybody, because the army was shooting people, shooting protesters, shooting everybody. They don't care. They don't care about nobody. They just threw out their bombs, their bullets, and everything.
Did you see people shooting the army?
Not shooting with bullets, but shooting with perdigón.
Rubber bullets, I think.
Yes. I saw a lot of them, and I saw a lot of people who cannot breathe because, the bombs.
The tear gas.
Yes, I saw the protester burn a big bus, and was very, very strange. Everything was very strange today because the things that happened today wasn't prepared. So nobody knows where to go or where to be, People... And I was between protesters and army shooting people. So it was terrible for me.
We've seen film of people being run over by army or military trucks in the streets. Did you see any of that?
Yes, I saw that. And I didn't saw this thing I'm going to tell you. But I hear that this truck hit a man, and he's dead.
And what about the feeling? You said that the Guaidó is speaking to the military, but it doesn't sound like the military are completely behind Guaidó now.
Yes, I don't know exactly how many armies with Guaidó or not, but a lot of them this morning defend him. So this is a good point, but not all of them. Not all of them. They are negotiating right now to see what is going to happen.
And what do you think will happen?
Well, I think that lately everybody is going to be with Guaidó because there is no more chance for Maduro now. The U.S. Donald Trump talked to him and said that today he have to leave. So they are negotiating that.
Tatiana Cardona there in Caracas. Now, Amy, obviously this is happening in your country's backyard, really, and I know the United States is pretty involved in all this. What are your views about it?
Well, there's a lot of oil that came out of Venezuela for a very long time, and our organization is very engaged in trying to stop, fossil fuel production around the world. And the way that the fuel and the food is used as a weapon within its own country, it's quite startling and very concerning.
Andy, this is clearly very much a financial issue in many ways. This is a country that's pretty much bankrupt. What do you think about it?
Well, I think that it's not going to be a pretty ending. The people in power saw what happened to the dictators after the Jasmine Revolution 80 years ago. So I think it's not going to be pretty, and it's very unfortunate the United States has to be involved. It makes it look like it's from an outside intervention. Venezuela is a tragedy. It's a really high inflation, and there's a middle class is being hit hard, but a lot of poor people. Why Maduro government is in power is because of the poor people. So I don't see that even if the Maduro leaves, the country will be peaceful.
Well, we'll see what does happen. Obviously, that's a developing story at the moment, and we'll keep you posted on developments in that country as they come over. Now, Apple was once the world's biggest company by market capitalization. Now it's only one of the world's largest, but its quarterly results that were out in the last few hours show it's still pretty huge, with revenues of around $58 billion. But all is not rosy. There was the largest ever drop in iPhone sales and a 16% drop in profits. On the other hand, its share price rose in after-hours trading, suggesting the markets were expecting something rather worse. The core problem is the decline of iPhone sales in China. Now, here are some views from China on what they like and don't like in smartphones.
I use Oppo. I've always used them and I'm used to it. I've never used an iPhone and have no feeling for it. Oppo is surely cheaper than iPhone.
I use Huawei now to support the homemade brand. I find it more user-friendly than the iPhone. It's more convenient in many ways. I consider Apple's data leaking a serious problem. I don't like it.
I use an iPhone 7. Because many others were using it, I thought I'd give it a try. In general, it's good. The only problem is the signal isn't stable enough, especially on my server, China Telecom. The price is fine, I can accept that.
I use Vivo mainly because of its functions. Chinese phones are as good as iPhones now. The Android system is really fast. I haven't used an iPhone, but I use an iPad and a Mac. I used to use Huawei, but now my whole family uses Vivo.
I use iPhone from iPhone 4 to now, the 10. I'm used to it, but actually, not many people around me use iPhone.
Some Chinese consumers there. So can Apple ride all this out and change direction towards services like, Amazon? Here's the technology writer, Stephanie Hare.
They've definitely got the cash. They've got some incredible creative talent and business talent. The question is, are they the the company that really goes, front of mind when you think about anything other than the phone. That's what makes Amazon such an interesting competitor, because depending on who you're talking to, you might be using Amazon for totally different things, right? They've really diversified, and it's quite democratic. So any person walking around on the street might be using Amazon. It's affordable for what they want to do, or it could be, businesses. I mean, even the CIA uses Amazon Web Services. So who is Apple going for, and what? And how do they make their product offerings sticky so that people are using it every day, if not every month?
Well, that seems to be what Apple intends, and markets have factored that in, which is why Apple's share price rose in after-hours trading, despite the not highly shining results. That, at least, is the view of Connie Guglielmo, editor-in-chief of the tech website CNET.
These results are better than people expected. Let's just put it in the context of which quarter this is. This is their fiscal second quarter, and it comes after their usually blowout holiday quarter when they sell many things. That is usually their biggest quarter of the year. This is before the dads and grads period of sales or back to school shopping. So typically this quarter is among their lowest, and so the expectations are low. That said, they did better than expected on analysts' expectations, and that's why you're seeing a lift in the stock price after market.
But it does look quite bad on the surface. I mean, you're talking about the highest ever drop in iPhone sales, and although the revenue is good, it's certainly not comparable really to what some people expected in the past.
Well, what you're seeing is the story playing out pretty much how Apple has been laying it out over the past few months. And what they've been saying is to not focus on iPhone sales. Now, of course, that is not going to stop anybody from not focusing on iPhone sales. It is their most valuable product. But they recognize the market realities that most people in the world have a smartphone, that most people are taking longer between purchasing a phone to upgrade. And so they have tried to get the market to shift and focus their attention on services. That includes things like their iTunes media services and a bunch of the new services that they announced at a big event in March, and they're hoping will continue to drive growth for them. This is why you see Tim Cook leading today's earnings announcement in their press release with talk of how services revenue hit a milestone and reached its highest number. So yes, iPhone sales are slowing. And if you just look at that number, you could say, well, they might be in trouble, but they have already been setting the context around. That is one number that you should look at. And most of the growth that they claim that they're going to be driving this year is from these new services.
But I suppose the trouble is everyone associates Apple with hardware. They associate it with things you can pick up and hold, and usually very smart-looking ones at that. It's like turning around a big ocean liner, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, this company now is, approaching $1 trillion in valuation. So it is about turning a big ocean liner. And you're right. They primarily have been making their money from devices. The iPhone obviously is their biggest brand and the biggest driver. The iPad also had a good quarter. Again, it's not a main driver of sales, but it had a good quarter this time around. And then, of course, they have the Macintosh computers. Also, once their primary driver, not so long ago, remember, it used to be called Apple Computer. And then when they introduced the iPhone, they, talked about becoming a consumer electronics brand. And now that we've seen market saturation with the iPhone, and don't get me wrong, they're still selling a lot of iPhones, they're trying to shift their focus and investors' focus to the fact that they're doing really well in services. Remember, they have more than 1 billion active devices on the market. As of last quarter, I believe it was something like 1.4 billion total active devices. 900 of those are iPhones. That is a captive audience of people who are locked into their iOS operating system and ecosystem that they can sell services to. And if they can figure out how to do that well, there is definitely upside.
Connie Guglielmo there. So, Andy, it's all being driven from China, apparently. Do you think that's right?
Well, so far, yes, because the Chinese-made phones are more readily available in China, and the Chinese consumers are more price sensitive. I think that this phenomenon will spread to other countries. iPhone's strategy of selling a phone, an electronic gadget at ever-increasing price, it's not going to work out because all other electronics products tend to get cheaper over time.
Are you still buying an iPhone? Do you still have an iPhone?
I have an iPhone because I have two phones. I use an iPhone and I use an Android phone. But the issue is that for most people have one phone. They are price sensitive. So I think that the Apple makes most money from selling iPhones, and it's in a world of trouble. And the bad news is going to continue for a long time to come.
Certainly sounds like that. Amy, I mean, are you an iPhone user?
I am. Our whole family is sort of a captive audience, and my husband, Truth in Advertising, is my husband, fixes Macs. And his big complaint is that because they make Macs and iPhones and other things so well, he's kind of like the Maytag repairman where he doesn't get called that much, and he actually does provide more tutorial and services and other things because the hardware holds up. So.
And are you looking forward to the sort of the era of a lot more services being available for your Apple?
Well, for
machines?
me, I'm not so interested. And the thing is, my work is a PC office, so I have to kind of navigate in two worlds, which I wish I didn't. And he helps me. He can't help me at all when I have problem at work.
But you wouldn't be tempted to migrate to something else just because it would work more easily with perhaps your PC office.
Right. Our office won't do that. But I think that I'm a penny pincher myself, so I'm not so inclined. But if you ever talk to my husband, he loves buying services. So he's probably like many other people out there who would be willing to, if the price is right and it doesn't keep compounding. As we're seeing in the TV industry, right? You're starting to have to pay for everything.
So it's a changing world out there. It'll be interesting to see how Apple survives it. Thanks very much to both of you. Well, we're going to talk now about what can be a very sensitive subject. Conversation about menstruation isn't that comfortable. A short documentary on exactly that subject, though, made the headlines recently when it won an Oscar for the best short documentary. You might remember we featured it on the programme and indeed interviewed its director. It's called Period, End of Sentence. It tells the story of women in rural India fighting for menstrual equality in a place where periods still face intense stigma. The film focused on how the women set up their own sanitary pad-making operation. And winning that Oscar has meant that in India, at least, activists, entrepreneurs, and even Bollywood are now talking about an often taboo subject. The BBC's Monica Miller reports now from Mumbai.
I'll break the silence on menstruation.
Young girls dressed in blue tunics with their hair in braids and bows are attending a class with Bhavna Ajali, who was giving a talk in English and Hindi on menstruation. They're looking at their instructor with wide eyes and anxious expressions on their faces.
Unless they don't know why this is happening, they take it as a taboo or something which makes them impure.
Miss Anjali says menstruation isn't openly discussed in the Indian society, and it's not just young girls who are unaware of the biological facts.
This particular lady had two young girls who were about to get married, and when we were talking about it, she said, I never thought that there is a connection between childbirth and menstruation.
Dharavi is one of Asia's biggest slums. It's got a population of 1 million people, which is a city within the city of Mumbai. As I was walking through some of the narrow alleys, the smells alone let me know that sanitation is a real challenge here.
Most of the toilets are public toilets where the sanitation facilities are really not good.
Dr. Anushri Patil of India's National Institute of Research in Reproductive Health has come across several cases where women have suffered from infection.
The water supply is a problem. So, the basic thing of washing and cleaning, all those things also get compromised.
Women health advocates say that the cost of sanitary products can be prohibitive. In some cases, women wind up cutting up old pieces of cloth and reusing them. Suhani Mohan of Cyril Design Solutions left a career in banking to manufacture sanitary napkin machines, which produce cheap cotton pads.
I spend about 100 rupees every month on my sanitary napkins, while almost 22% of Indians, the family income for them is less than 2,000 rupees. So how would they be able to manage menstrual hygiene?
There is a trend among social enterprises to find and make reasonably priced feminine products. However, The taboos that have had a devastating impact on girls and women are hard to break. So how do you get a population of 1.3 billion people talking about a delicate topic? A Bollywood hit.
अमेरिका के पास सुपरमैन है, बैटमैन है, स्पाइडरमैन है, लेकिन इंडिया के पास पैडमैन है.
The 2018 film Padman was inspired by a local businessman who started making low-cost sanitary napkins after he discovered his wife was reusing her rags. The actors also launched the Padman Challenge, a viral social media campaign across India, with them pictured holding sanitary napkins.
But Didi, why do we get periods?
Periods? From the big screen to YouTube and comics, Miss Gupta and her husband created a comic book called Menstrupedia.
When it came to access of sanitary napkin, I did not have access to it. Not because my family couldn't afford it, because even buying of sanitary napkins were considered shameful.
The couple quit their jobs and used their savings to build a business around this story. Menstrupedia has now been translated into 16 languages.
Why comic book works is the fact that it does not look like a dirty book or on a dirty topic.
Miss Gupta says while she may have been told that decent girls don't talk about their periods, her hope is to start a new tradition by passing down the lessons of menstruation free of social taboos from one generation to another.
Welcome back to Business Matters with me, Roger Hearing, and my guests today, Andy Shea and Amy Goldsmith. Now, the practice on our programme tends to be we have a new guest, we have a little chat about them and where they come from and what they do and all that sort of stuff. And Amy, you're the new guest, so I'm afraid you're subject to it. So, first of all, just tell us, where are you from? What's your background?
So, I live in New Jersey, and I've been doing this work for over 30 years.
How did you get into it? Where do you... You're from New Jersey originally. Were you originally involved in this?
Yeah, I'm originally from New York. I moved to Minneapolis. I lived in Boston, and I've been in New Jersey since 1992. And I got involved in this first by actually working on nuclear power and nuclear waste issues.
Oh, that's very interesting.
1979.
So, that was an interesting time to be. 3 Mile Island and the aftermath, of course.
Yes.
Was it something around that time that you just thought this is something I need to do, that you needed to be involved in the environment, perhaps, in the broadest terms?
Well, interestingly enough, I went to college thinking that I would do both science and politics, because I knew that as we debate climate change now, facts don't always override politics. So we have to work in politics to make sure that we protect our environment and our health.
And was there one particular incident or moment of revelation that pushed you into this, or was it something you'd always been aware of?
Well, I think it was at that time, it was, minutes to midnight. It was a lot of concern about whether we were going to annihilate ourselves with nuclear weapons. And I didn't want to, be in a world like that.
And so you thought you'd get involved in doing something about it. And when you left college, what did you go into first?
Well, I first worked as a volunteer for an organization fighting the disposal of high-level nuclear waste in Minnesota and fighting for the safety of a nuclear power plant that was near Minneapolis.
And do you think you succeeded? Was it a case of doing something and then actually making a difference?
Yeah, we actually drove from little town to little town, being on the radio like I am right now, talking to people about nuclear waste, and we actually did prevent nuclear waste from coming to Minnesota.
Okay, so how did you get from that to dealing with water? Because, they're obviously both environmental issues, but quite different ones.
Well, I went to Boston, still working on nuclear waste issues, and I got involved with the organization that I am with now in 1985. And they approached me and said, well, we like what you do. Why don't you come and work for us?
Okay, and
that's how that happened.
They're called Clean Water Action. That's the title, isn't it?
Yes, and the reason why we're called Clean Water Action is our founder, David Zwick, helped write and pass the original Clean Water Act, hence our name, Clean Water Action.
Okay, so what exactly do you do? If someone said, okay, now what is Clean Water Action? What's its intentions? How does it do it? What does it do?
Mm-hmm. Well, we work on multiple issues that all connect to water. We work on energy, water, environmental justice, waste, and we also work to make democracy work. So we literally knock on people's doors every night in 16 states, engaging people by writing letters, signing petitions, calling the governor or whoever it is that we need to get change. So we actually engage people at the grassroots level to make the change that we seek, whether it's at the local level with a local plastics ordinance or at the state level, or even at the federal level, and we work to elect pro-environmental candidates to office.
Okay, so I mean, essentially what you're trying to do is make sure that the water that people use and drink is clean, is safe.
Right, so fishable, drinkable, that's swimmable.
Yeah.
We want to be able to touch the water and be able to not worry about whether they're going to get a rash from it or get sick from it.
And how big a problem is that in the US? I mean, I suppose people perhaps will have one contact in this, which the name Flint comes to people's minds when they think about safety and water. And, of course, that was in Michigan, of course, a town that had major, major problems with its water supply, didn't it?
Yes, it did. But in New Jersey, we have many towns, suburban towns and urban towns like Newark or Trenton, who are in violation of their drinking water levels. And we've been literally knocking on doors, getting water filters to people, but also getting them to sign up for lead service line replacements. A lot of this, there's really a solution available. Sometimes it's a question of money. Some of it is just people don't know. And it's making, moving people as well as policy and the dollars in the right place to get the solutions we seek.
And again, what are the problems are what? Just old infrastructure, pipes that perhaps are falling apart, or proximity to dangerous chemicals? I mean, what is the core of the problem here?
Well, there's a number of different cores. I mean, one is that, we are in an industrial world, and there are over 60,000 chemicals that are out there in the world, and over 600 of them are commonly found in our water, like PFAS, the stuff that makes Teflon.
Oh, I think we had a slight problem with our... Hello? Can you hear me, Amy? I think we've lost our links to Amy there. She was telling us about water purification, trying to make it better, but Philadelphia seems to have communication problems. Well, Andy, let's talk to you while we're waiting to reestablish contact there with Amy.
Okay.
What is the water situation in China? I mean, is it a problem? Do people, the state, I guess, provides the water? Does it provide it well?
Yeah, I think the piped water is widely available, but the issue is that it's not clean water usually, and people are going to bottle the water in increasing numbers. So it's common. You see the bottled water gets shipped around in cities. People drink from it, and people also use bottled water for cooking.
So they don't trust the water that comes out of the taps, then, really.
Yeah, I think a lot of local governments say that the water is safe to drink. I think not many people believe it.
Do you believe it? I mean, would you normally drink water straight from the tap or not?
Unfortunately, I don't. The issue is that you go to rivers, you don't see fish. The rivers are usually highly polluted. And the environment is a multi-province issue, and a lot of provinces have different standards. And the waterways are all connected. So I think that it's a very complicated issue. And the central government basically has lower standards for poor provinces on the environment. And then you cannot have different standards for water, and the water all flows around.
It has to be universal, doesn't it? Really, to make it work.
Yeah, China has not changed its priority between environment and economic growth, and I think that the government the government will change only if we have a massive crisis like what Japan faced in the 1960s. A lot of people got sick or died from pollution.
It's interesting. It does. When Yeah, I was going to say, it does seem to be that's the problem. You need to have some major crisis, people take things seriously. Now, Amy, I think we've got you back on the line. Can you hear us all right?
Yeah.
Excellent. We dropped you just out for a moment. Now, I was just in the interim talking to Andy, as you may have heard there, about the situation in China, where many people, including Andy, aren't really very willing to drink water out of the taps. They use bottled water most of the time. Now, in the United States, I mean, is it particular parts of the US that have a major problem with the safety of the water supply?
Well, it depends. If you're in an agricultural place, then you have worries about pesticides. If you're in an industrial legacy state like New Jersey, it's from chemical plants. It's really depends on where you are and how responsible your state is. In the United States, the floor is the federal law, but states have the power to have stronger policies. And it's imperative for the states and for people to be very diligent to make sure their water is protected.
And what's the mechanism for that? I mean, is there regular testing? I mean, again, thinking back to what happened in Flint, it did seem to be almost out of the blue. Someone suddenly discovered that actually people were being poisoned, really, from their water supply. I mean, is there a basic regular testing regime?
Well, there is for public water supplies, but if you have private wells, there's no regulations for that, although in New Jersey there's a requirement for testing and disclosing that information at point of sale or leasing or renting. But a lot of people are on private wells, all in rural and suburban areas.
And these are private wells that belong to householders rather than to companies, is that right?
That's correct. They're not centrally managed.
But the ones that are, I mean, most people will get their water from a water company. That's how it works generally, I guess.
That is true, and actually we've been working here in the state of New Jersey to get the state to require companies to install extra filtration, activated carbon filtration, when they find families of chemicals, volatile organic chemicals, and just to do the filtration. Don't wait for the standard, because arsenic, it took 60 years for them to change the standard, and we can't go chemical by chemical. We need to deal with families of chemicals and
do them all at
protect
once.
people.
Yeah. Have there been many incidents in New Jersey? I mean, have there been moments like Flint? Have there been particular places that have had really big problems with their water?
Well, Newark right now is, as I said, has distributed 35,000 water filters and is planning to change over 18,000 lead service lines, so that's lead. There was a town in South Jersey that had mercury in their water, and it ended up literally crippling people.
People drank the water and suffered crippling injuries as a result.
Right, that you could not you could not correct over time. So people are in wheelchairs, and the state had to come in and
were people
take
not
over the
outraged
water
about
slide.
that? Was there not a sort of public outcry?
Yes, and that actually resulted in the private well testing law being passed as a result of that. And the reason why that was discovered was a diligent local health officer realized that something was wrong in that neighborhood and did something.
So it really does seem to be a matter of sort of public outrage and diligent officials. So Andy, coming back to you again, I mean, is there that in China? Are people prepared to write to the government, to make a noise, to push to try and get a good water supply?
Oh, I think that the dissent is tightly controlled. If you do something like that, the government may think you want to destabilize the society. You could go to jail. So people usually in China take defensive measures, and they just buy bottled water, do their own investigation, and see which company is reliable and so forth. So it's Chinese people tend to take actions on their own and don't wait for the government.
And they don't have people like Amy out there campaigning.
This kind of NGO, I don't think is allowed.
So people have to make their own resources and make it work. There we are. Thanks very much indeed to both of you, Amy and Andy, and an insight into the ways in which water safety is handled on different sides of the world. Right, now it's that moment in the programme where we link up with one of our reporters. Today it's Cindy Su, live on the line from Taipei, Taiwan. So Cindy, the word extradition seems to be floating around a lot. I know there have been protests in Hong Kong, but it's a bit of an issue in Taiwan as well at the moment, isn't it?
Well, yes, because Taiwan is somehow linked to this whole controversy in Hong Kong over the new laws that the Hong Kong legislature are planning to pass, which would allow individuals from Hong Kong people to foreigners to be extradited to mainland China for trial. So that has caused a lot of alarm in Hong Kong, and we saw that reflected in a protest over the weekend by 100,000 people on the streets of Hong Kong in the former British colony. And it was one of the largest protests in years. Now, the reason why this law is so controversial is because it's seen by a lot of critics and as well as ordinary Hong Kong people as a way for Beijing to tighten its grip on Hong Kong. And so the reasoning behind this law, according to the government, is that they don't want Hong Kong to become a haven for fugitive criminals. And ironically, it was a case that involved a Hong Kong man who allegedly murdered his girlfriend in Taiwan that the authorities are using as the reason for passing this law, because without a extradition law, Hong Kong cannot extradite this man to Taiwan for trial. So they're saying with this extradition law, they can not only extradite people to Taiwan for trial and to other places, but also to mainland China. And they're promising that people who are accused of political crimes would not be extradited to China, and that the Hong Kong's courts would still have the final say on extraditions. Yeah, but that has not calmed people's nerves.
I was going to say, there's a very famous case of a particular bookshop worker who's involved in books and some very controversial ones, and there's some fears about what might happen to him under this.
Yes, and so this law is expected to be passed in 3 months. But Mr. Lam Wing-Ki, this bookseller that you mentioned, he is not taking any chances. So over the weekend, he has basically fled Hong Kong and is now seeking refuge in Taiwan. And his reasoning, as he told some media, including Reuters, is that there's a 99% chance that the Chinese authorities would catch him and send him back to China if he stayed in Hong Kong. And he believes that this is a very, very real danger for him, because he and five other Hong Kong booksellers were detained by Chinese agents. They were basically picked up in mainland China, in Hong Kong, and in Thailand. So but the reason why he was later released back to Hong Kong on bail was supposedly for a brief visit. But he managed to stay and live there as a fugitive. But now he fears that with this extradition law, he would not be safe in Hong Kong. That's why he fled to Taiwan.
I was going to say, and will Taiwan presumably will protect him from that, will they?
Oh, this is very interesting, because under the current government of Taiwan, which is quite anti-China and quite alarmed by China's lack of democracy, it's quite open to helping these people who are considered troublemakers by China. And so, and even before this case of Mr. Lam, Taiwan had welcomed Hong Kong immigrants, because Taiwan suffers from a brain drain and also a low birth rate. So it wants people like Hong Kong people who can invest in the economy, who can create jobs, and it would even allow them to come here even if they don't invest, as long as they have a job or if they're married to Taiwanese people. So Taiwan is open to allowing people like Mr. Lam to stay here, and Mr. Lam himself is trying to raise money to open a bookstore as a way, he says, of resisting against China.
It's interesting, and I guess if this this does become a controversial area, it could worsen relations between Taiwan and China just because of the fact that Taiwan is prepared to do this.
Yes, indeed. I mean, but we have to understand Taiwan is a very different kind of society from Hong Kong. Taiwan has operated as basically a self-ruled, independent, society for decades, and it's a very vibrant democracy. So even before Mr. Lam came here, Taiwan was already hosting Chinese dissidents, including 1989 Tiananmen Square student leaders like Wang Dan and Wu Kaixi. So Taiwan has no problems with that. Taiwan sees it as its right to decide its own society. And so, but now, given the elections are coming up in 2020 next year, and a pro-China party could be elected, there are some fears that this party, this pro-China Kuomintang party, if it regains power, it could come under pressure from Beijing to perhaps not be so welcoming of these people.
Cindy, thanks very much. Cindy Su there, live on the line from Taipei. Now, this was a headline on Indian TV on Monday.
The Indian Army on Monday claimed to have sighted footprints of Yeti, a mystical creature that many over the decades claim to have seen but not been able to show proof of. Now, sharing images on their official Twitter handle, the Indian Army said that the mountaineering expedition team found the Yeti's mysterious footprints measuring 32 by 15 inches, and the Army said it discovered the footprints of the mystical beasts.
Well, there we are. The pictures, which you can see if you Google India and Yeti, show what seems to be a huge paw print. And that went viral on social media, and it has to be said, invited a fair amount of derision for the soldiers, saying they appeared credulous about something that widely regarded as, well, largely imaginary. But is that right? The Yeti, or abominable snowman, hidden high in the Himalayas, has been the subject of debate for centuries. Is it a leftover of some kind from a previous era? Is it perhaps something entirely different, a hairy ape, a form of primitive man, even a huge snow bear? Or is it just so much wishful thinking and fantasy? Well, it has a cousin, of course, in the equally evasive US creature, the Sasquatch or Bigfoot. So, is there any science at the root of all this? Well, I've been speaking to Lauren Coleman, an eminent cryptozoologist and founder of the International Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine.
Oh, there certainly is. Since 1921, the Western science has come into the fore, but we know that there's thousands of years of tapestries and artifacts from the Himalaya, and it certainly indicates there seems to be an unknown primate there, so people are very interested.
But isn't it a bit weird that given all the science that we have, and drones and satellite photos and all the rest of it, that we haven't been able to see one of these things?
Well, many people, many mountaineers, many local villagers, porters have seen it. So I think it's one of the myths within the field of the skeptics that none of these have been seen. They're seen quite regularly. People look for them in the wrong places. They look on the mountains and the high terrain, but they're actually seen more often in the mountain valleys, and that's where they really live.
And is there proper scientific evidence? Then we have photos of these things, we have samples of hair and body parts, that kind of thing?
Well, we certainly had a lot of samples of hair. Some of them have turned out to be the sero, which is a goat antelope, and other animals that are not primates. But there's no good photographs. There's very foggy photographs from far away. But the Yeti is one of the more elusive creatures.
So do you think personally, there is a Yeti in the same way that perhaps there is a Bigfoot in the US?
Well, I think there's a high percentage chance that there is. This recent evidence from the Indian Army, however, I think is a little sketchy because there have never been reports of Yeti footprints that are 35 inches by 15 inches. That seems a little bit beyond the pale, and it may be a meltout of a goat or a mountain wolf tracking through the snow and then melting forth to something that's much larger. One of the ways that you can tell that we should be a little suspicious of this is the stride between these giant footprints is very small. It's almost as if this creature is tiptoeing through the mountains, and that doesn't seem like what we've heard about Yeti.
Do you think there is a chance that we will actually find this creature in a proper way now?
I think there may. It's all about funding and about interest, and political conflicts in the area keep people away sometimes. One of the problems, of course, with the Himalayas and Nepal and Bhutan and all of those, a lot of people think that by the time we get close to Yeti, it may already be extinct.
How did you get interested in all this?
Oh, well, in 1960, almost 60 years ago, I saw a film about a hairy creature in the mountains of Asia, and went to school, asked my teachers what this was about, and they said, they don't exist. Get back to your studies. Leave us alone. So, of course, that stimulated my curiosity, and I went full bore into studying about the Loch Ness Monster and sea serpents and Bigfoot, and one thing led to another. You start writing articles and books, and before you know it, the BBC News is calling you.
I mean, isn't there an element of wishful thinking in all this? I mean, we'd all love these to exist. Isn't that really the reason you keep going, rather than actually thinking they do?
Well, I mean, I guess that's a way to put up the ridicule curtain, but in many ways, I'm very interested in animals. I'm interested in mysteries, and pursuing these mysteries, we know that new species are discovered all the time. It was only a few years ago that we discovered a new tapir, new monkeys. Last week, it was a new orca has been discovered. So there's new animals being discovered all the time. It's just that we have to follow the indigenous people's tales and the ethno-known evidence that we have, and we'll come up with new animals.
Lauren Coleman there and his Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine. Interesting word, cryptozoology, means hidden wildlife, which I guess is pretty much a definition of the Yeti. Andy, well, first of all, are you a believer? In fact, I imagine there would be similar crypto animals in China, perhaps in the mountains. Is that true?
Well, there are a lot of tall tales going around. It's always been like that. I spent a couple of weeks in Tibet a few years ago, over there, and not many people, very boring, not much oxygen. So sometimes you see things.
Right.
I think that it's really doubtful, because you look at the Mount Everest. It's almost like a bazaar. So many people going up all the time. Nobody has a report of seeing one.
You didn't see a Yeti while you were there, did you?
No, you hallucinate sometimes. But when you wake up, you know that it wasn't real.
Well, we'll see. Amy, what do you think? I mean, of course, you've got the Sasquatch or Bigfoot supposedly in the US somewhere.
Well, actually, we also have in New Jersey, we have the Jersey Devil in the Pinelands.
Oh, tell me about that. Tell me about the Jersey Devil.
There's lots of tall tales. In fact, the hockey team in New Jersey is named after the Jersey Devil. And there's lots of stories about how it hides and wanders around. But
what does it look like?
It looks like a devil with a big tail.
Oh, right. Okay.
So I think it's really quite more like a tall tale than it is,
you've never seen the Jersey
Sasquatch.
Devil, I assume.
No, but there are lots of books and people have made money talking about it.
Yeah. But I mean, so you're firmly on the skeptical side on all this, are you?
I would say on the Jersey Devil, I would say I'm skeptical.
On the Bigfoot?
Yeah. Well, you never know.
Somewhere in the backwoods? Maybe in New Jersey somewhere. Who knows? I mean, it's possible.
Yeah.
They get everywhere, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's no doubt it does bring in a lot of interest and, probably a lot of tourist money too. And even if, as Andy says, it's to do with lack of oxygen, well, people like to imagine these things exist, and perhaps we should too. Anyway, that's it pretty much from the entirely believable Business Matters. We're back same time tomorrow. My thanks to Andy, my thanks to Amy, and my thanks to all of you for joining us. Bye-bye.